Hey! There was movement around Australia. So gathered from far and near to listen to old mate Leon on the radio, loud and clear.
An international controversy has erupted over an Ohio doctor who is scheduled to give a series of talks to concerned parents in Australia. The topic, vaccines. You may remember Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. Yes, the doctor who was targeted by the United Nations as a leading influencer, arguing that vaccines cause brain injury. Well, groups are now calling for her visa to be revoked, and venues are pulling out to prevent her from speaking about vaccines in Australia.
The mother of Ebola is the Marburg virus that first broke out in 3 vaccine production facilities in 3 different parts of the world simultaneously in 1967, killing 7 people and injuring another 31. This grave risk came from the fact that the monkey supplier, Lytton Bionetics, was also a leading biological weapons contractor for the military and the CIA by 1969.
To gain momentum, growing numbers of parents are saying no to immunisation, especially in wealthier suburbs. Medical evidence suggests this has the potential to put other children at risk. The Australian Medical Association believes tougher measures, including childcare bans for non-immunised children, should be introduced. And there are also calls to close a federal government loophole preventing parents who don't immunise from receiving the childcare rebate.
$10 billion over the next 10 years to make it the year of the vaccines. What does that mean exactly?
Well, over this decade, we believe unbelievable progress can be made, both inventing new vaccines and making sure they get out to all the children who need them.
Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people.
We can get this down to 0. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to 0. Now that's back from high school algebra, but let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
So put the billy on, Australia. Gather round that radio and come join the resistance. It's a Fairdinkum radio show. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us again from wherever you're listening all around the world. My name's Leon Pittard, and I'm the host of Fairdinkumradio.com. We are broadcasting out of the land down under in Australia. Well, today we turn our attention to the subject of individuality and free speech. Just exactly are we in Australia and indeed worldwide today? It was only a few weeks ago that millions marched in Europe with the label, "I am Charlie." Really? I said at the time that this was a huge psychological operation. Were the millions really advocates of free speech? Or were they being managed into a global matrix, marching behind those political figures that selectively harass, jail, and some of them assassinate those who advocate the kind of free speech that threatens their species' survival? Only this week in Australia, Alan Jones, a popular mainstream broadcaster, is being sued by a collective of Queensland predators because he is daring to expose corruption in high places. Then we turn to Dr Sherry Tenpenny, who's the latest victim of this parasitic Australian Medical Cartel and their online hashtag gangs in Australia. These people mock, deride and target anyone who dares to question the holy religion of their medical cartel, specifically vaccines. So the state and the minions of the state are actively trying to regulate every aspect of our lives, our thoughts, our actions, and especially our speech, because these predators see individuality and freedom of speech as a disease that must be vaccinated, eliminated, before those ideas of individuality, personal responsibility and freedom from the scientific matrix, including natural health, can be shared with humanity. And what is their greatest fear? Their greatest fear is the individual who thinks and speaks freely. Joining us is our good friend, researcher, writer and journalist John Rappaport from No More Fake News. John, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here as always. Thanks.
Well, it's great to speak with you again, friend. And in tumultuous times, you recently wrote, "The reality manufacturing company not only turns out the past, present and future for mass consumption, but it also explains why things are the way they are. It appoints itself the master of attributing causes, the king of cause and effect." That's what we're talking about, isn't it? A worldwide matrix that manufactures reality.
That's exactly what we're talking about. And the primary assumption is that this manufacturing of reality is done for the masses. It's not done for the individual. The individual is to be eradicated completely. That's the program. And masses are to be looked at as some kind of a gigantic group that will agree with the reality that is created for them as a collective, as a whole. So you're referring to the PSYOP in Paris. You know, this is an example, as you say, of gigantic hypocrisy, because many of the leaders who were there, the people who were supporting free speech, are completely against free speech when it comes to the most important subjects on the planet. And they will hide their secrets as long as they possibly can, in the hope that they'll eventually be able to control and run the planet in the same way that the European Council runs Europe, even more tightly than that. But that's the whole plan. And in order for that to happen, people have to have their free speech curtailed. In fact, you can see that both parties, the congressmen, the senators, everybody in the legislature, everybody in the White House, everybody in the judiciary, line up behind globalism and all of the treaties that embody it, all of the agreements that embody it, because this is what we're talking about here. The reality manufacturing company is the technical arm of globalism. And they never say anything about globalism. They never mention it. They never vote against it. It's censored completely.
Well, look at this Marine Le Pen. I mean, she's one voice in France that has said that corporations, bankers are running this country. We need to make a change. And here's one voice that speaks up against globalism. She was invited in with all the other party leaders prior to this march. And then she was told that she would be banned from marching with the leaders in this march. So this is the freedom that these people are advocating, is this is a selective chosen people that speak their narrative, right? And anyone that doesn't, they're excluded.
Exactly. So that's so much for free speech.
Yeah. And so
it's a facade. It's what the Paris, demonstrations seemed to be promoting was free speech. But that's the cover story. We are for freedom, we are for free speech, and millions of us will gather here to make sure that that exists. But when it comes to the most crucial issues that are facing us, it's gone.
Yes, yeah. The real issues to speak about, real freedom, as in your national identity, your culture, questioning vaccines, questioning who's controlling the country, whether it be corporations, bankers, special interest groups which are sponsoring the political system. These questions are excluded, and as you said, the left and the right agree not to touch on any of these subjects that are the real subjects that are outside the media matrix, right? So the media will continue only to run the narrative and to sideline anyone like Marine Le Pen as extremists, as dangerous, which we'll get to in a moment with Dr Sherry Tenpenny, But it does not matter whether it's someone speaking about national, standing up for their own people in their particular country. I know that our friend Henrik over there in Sweden, he's undergoing the same assault. All of Europe, in fact, all of the world, in my view, our cultures are being assaulted by this machine to bring about this hybrid drone with a global mind of the future, right?
Yes, the idea is that people will essentially be reduced to androids, faceless, without real personalities, without differences, without strength, without power. And any way that this can be accomplished, it's in progress. That's the whole idea. So no more borders, no more nations, that's the goal. And no more cultures of any kind, really. And just this sort of amorphous mass of people who are obedient to their masters.
I mentioned earlier that one of the mainstream broadcasters here in Australia has been exposing political corruption in Queensland. They've got an election coming up this week, and one of the tools, of course, that many of these people use is the legislative system. And so they all ring their lawyers and say, well, we are going to sue you for defamation. So there's about half a dozen politicians that are suing him over him exposing the reality of what is taking place. But this is one of the tools that is obviously used to try and silence people. Now, just for the sake of our listeners that aren't in Australia, we do not have any First Amendment free speech guarantees in Australia. It is all basically subject to anyone litigating against you. And therefore, if anyone wants to go after you and take you to court, they can basically just bankrupt you through the process. And it's called really death by process. That's the way it is down here in Australia. Unlike you folk in the US, for instance, in your constitution, it's enshrined that free speech amendment. But I understand even your side, John, these things are under threat through different tools that are being used to erode this fundamental principle of individuality.
Excuse me. Yes, of course. Actually, I looked up the other day, I forget how I searched for it online, Free Speech Australia. And under the rules and regulations, what I really noticed was that the entire concept of free speech in Australia was justified by several international treaties stemming from the United Nations. There was absolutely no mention of anything sovereign about Australian free speech. It was all based on this internationalist idea promulgated in terms that the United Nations had released, which I found astounding. And now you've explained why, because it's not enshrined in the Constitution. And in the United States, what we're seeing is the concept of course, of national security, because national security can be invoked as a kind of emergency power in which, if not suspending the entire Constitution, the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of speech, can be suspended. And so that's the approach that's being taken. It's purely 1984 George Orwell. We're under threat, we're under attack, terrorism, this, that, and the other thing. We have to engage in order to protect national security, and so therefore we have to look at certain applications of free speech and say that they are not permitted because they could infringe upon national security. And as this national security threat, in heavy quotes, is ramped up and up and up and up, then what people will find is that their ability to exercise free speech is limited even further. So that's one of the major ways that it's being done. And the other is the way it's being done in the case of Sherry Tenpenny, as you mentioned, the attacks on her, the attacks on the venues at which she was going to speak in Australia about vaccines, from people who are surrogates, basically, of the government, surrogates of the medical cartel, to scream and attack and, call people by names like traitors and so forth, and dangerous criminals, etc., etc., because they are going against the reality manufacturing company and that reality.
Well, let's talk about Sherry and her tour. I do have a little clip here which we'll just play now, which basically, and I did endeavour to get her for an interview, but she's under siege at the moment. She's being, all of Europe is basically requesting interviews, Australia, US, so I understand that she's probably under siege because ever since it was come to the attention of the vaccine zealots here in Australia that she was coming, they pulled out all stops, and this is a very, very militant online organisation that works with government and, you know, with the medical cartel. And there are several high-profile players in the Australian Medical Association which are fully integrated with the media and have the ear of the media, of course, the mainstream media. And this is the way the campaign goes. Like, listen to this. A dangerous person is coming to Australia. This woman is a danger to your children. She is coming. She's not a terrorist, but she is an extremist. Prominent American anti-vaccine campaigner Sherri Tenpenny is scheduled to give a series of seminars. Now, it goes on the next campaign, hashtag Stop Anti-Vax Campaigner Sherri Tenpenny, hashtag Stop Tenpenny. Next one, refuse Sherri Tenpenny a visa. These are all appeals to the government on the basis that she will incite discord in the Australian community or in a part of it. She will be a danger to the Australian community or a part of it. So let's have a listen to Sherry speaking here in a recent interview.
Well, the tour was not organized by me, and that's one of the things that they keep saying in the media, that I have set up a tour of Australia, when actually I was invited there to speak after the people who were organizing the event discovered that I was coming there for a holiday. So they organized this event for me to speak to cities of Melbourne, Sydney, Gold Coast, Brisbane, and Adelaide over the course of about 3 weeks. And then in between times, I was going to be enjoying my holiday. And then I would be quietly getting back on the plane and flying back to the U.S., estimating that maybe I would speak to about 200 people per venue, so maybe 1,000 people out of Australia's 23 million people, and with just most of those people at that time would probably be like-minded and be very interested in the topic because they feel like it was something that they already knew something about and they wanted some additional information. And it's been the Australian press who's made this into an international uproar of all across the world, actually, because I've been getting calls for interviews not only from Australia but from Europe and from the EU. So it was not my design to come there and set up this speaking tour. It's just been the result of the pro-vaccine lobbies in Australia have decided that the people of Australia are not entitled to free choice. And if they are entitled to free choice, they can't do it based on any information that I might give them.
So a big welcome to Australia, to Dr Sherry Tenpenny from Australia with that, John. And so she was coming here for a holiday anyway. One of our individuals over here heard she was coming and thought she'd set up a few meetings. Of course, the medical cartel got a wind of it and, as she stated, caused this incredible uproar, right? So she is right in saying these people do not want any individual thinking, right, outside of the narrative that they've developed.
Yes, they don't want any of that. And, I mean, let's look at this for what it is. You can't talk about vaccines in a critical way in Australia because that's what it amounts to.
Yeah.
That through one means or another, the pro-vaccine lobby and all of their connections will keep you away from venues, will attack the people who run and own those venues, so that you can't even speak. And therefore, the people of Australia can't listen to that speech about vaccines. This isn't simply about whether or not to vaccinate. This is about whether or not someone is allowed to speak about the issue.
Yes, that's the issue.
So that is, fascism. That is a police state. That is the worst kind of criminal behavior. And believe me, because I know Sherry, if the critics want to say that she is dangerous, and they will enumerate the reasons, because if our children don't get vaccinated, they're not protected against illness and they can die, and that could be your children, et cetera, all these reasons, you see, why she is dangerous. Sherry has been through the wars. She is quite capable of handling those objections and speaking to them. This is not an amateur, somebody who hasn't been around the block and doesn't understand. She is one of the most knowledgeable people about vaccines in America. And so she is quite willing to say, okay, make a list of, the reasons why this kind of talk could lead people down the wrong path, and I will answer those objections one at a time. And then you can make up your mind about it. Let's get into the whole issue. Let's get into the real issue here. Is it really vaccines that knocked out a great percentage of so-called infectious diseases in the West? Is that really true? Is this whole concept of herd immunity, in which people must be vaccinated in order to protect those who aren't, is that really valid? Is that really true? Et cetera, you see. And then you would have a really rational presentation and discussion and questions and answers, and people could make up their own minds. But the people who are running the show in Australia are basically saying, A, the people are too stupid to know what's right or wrong. Therefore, they shouldn't be allowed to make up their own minds. And we, the experts, know how dangerous anti-vaccine conversation is, so we're going to stop it in the bud, because otherwise it would be a criminal invasion on public health. So that's their position. And the entire tradition of free speech means that you permit it even if you disagree with it.
Exactly.
Especially if you disagree with it.
Exactly.
So, for example, we could have somebody who wants to talk about how Islam will eventually create territories in the West where Sharia law is the actual law. And this is a speaker who is going to talk on the subject, and he's going to talk at such and such an event at this college, and you can come. So you're a person who completely disagrees with that whole program, and you think it's horrendous, but if he wants to talk about it, fine. Let's get it out in the open. Let us get it out in the open. There used to be, in fact, in the United States during the 40s and part of the 1950s, a proscription against mentioning or teaching about communism in schools in America, because that was considered to be ultra dangerous because communism was so evil. And eventually people started writing, publishing, saying, if you think it's so evil, then what you really want to do is put it in the light and explain it completely, so that everybody understands, first of all, what the hell it is. And then if you say that it's obviously evil, people will be able to see that according to you, and they will decide that it's absolutely the wrong thing. But no, we're not going to allow this to even take place. Too dangerous. Well, this is exactly the same kind of thing, except it's on a medical basis.
Exactly. And this is the thing that, we should have the right, and we do, humanity does, have the right to offend and be offended. That's the issue. But what we have today, we have the development of legislation, embedded interest groups in bureaucracies, internet jihad gangs that are developing this other system of, like one of my recent guests called it, reflexive law. In other words, is law based on the possibility of even damaging people's feelings. So you mentioned, if someone holds a meeting that, they want Australia to be a communist country, right? Well, let them speak. But the fact is we should be able to beat them with a better idea, right? But by trying to shut down the speech, which is what's happening in Dr Sherry Tenpenny's case and others in Australia, every single person that speaks up questioning the narrative of the medical cartel in Australia is targeted, like the girl Stephanie Messenger that organised the speaking venues for Sherry. They've done a great dirt job on her and her husband, and they've sledged up everything they can about every business deal they've had in the past, and character assassinations, etc., economic assassinations, all of these things. But that's not the issue to me, John. The real issue is, what are they scared of? You see, it's the ideas that are the most powerful. It is the idea of being able to question any single thing. Now, we're just returning back to France for a moment. I mean, that group Charlie Hebdo, they are obviously from the left. Many of them are part of communist parties themselves. But the point was, with that whole question for me, is that, yeah, they mocked Christianity. They, in my view, blasphemed, right? But I accept that that is what people can do, because I want the same ability to be able to speak out against anything else that I see as right or wrong according to my worldview. Whether it's Islam, whether it's the Jews, whether it's Christianity, it doesn't matter. And these people targeted every one of those aspects. But it was because they trod on one of those buttons, obviously, that it triggered things. Now, apart from getting into whether or not this was influenced or triggered or whatever, but just looking at it from the aspect of free speech and individuality, the fear of people believing different and causing laws to stop people is the disease that these people are trying to vaccinate against, right?
Yeah, of course. It's like saying, if you speak about this following subject X, then you're automatically committing a crime.
Yes.
We don't care who you are, what you say, but if you approach this subject and open it up to rational discussion, then you're committing a crime. Mm-hmm. Well, if this is the way things are going, then we're back in, the Middle Ages. We're back in feudalism. We're back in force determines everything. Force determines everything. That's it. Intimidation, force, who has the monopoly on entrenched power, they decide everything. And, there are signs that we are moving back in that direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Signs that we are moving back in that direction because, and I'll give you, another perception of mine about the internet. Aside from the gangs of, paid trolls and special interest groups that are just hammering away at people to try to limit free speech, because the internet has now been opened up to virtually anybody, it's a kind of a Pandora's box situation, because many people who previously kept their mouths shut because they had no way of expressing themselves now have a chance to. And they are so stupid, so ignorant, so undereducated, so unable to deal with ideas of any kind, that they don't know the difference between a rational discussion and launching an attack against a person who, for one reason or another, they don't like. Mm. They don't know the difference. Mm. Mm. They don't understand that, see. So that has also loosed millions of people who now can get onto comment sections and who can scream and argue and throw stones at each other and so forth, and turn this whole idea of a give and take of ideas, a debate, a formal argument, into a catastrophe.
Yes, yeah. I can see that, and every time I actually have distanced myself out of that matrix on the internet and keep largely away from it. And when I do go and have a look at it, sometimes when I see the comment threads and the stone throwing, something about it, John, that my whole spirit is sort of, I just don't want to be there. I look at all that and I go, this is not this is not good ideas that are being shared here, or this is not really quality thinking that's taking place here. I mean, we've had these hashtags, kill all men, from the feminist brigade, or recently here since the Martin Place incident with the Islamic chap here, we've got I'll ride with you, and this is like the left siding up with the extreme right of Islam. Like there's incredible unions that are taking place with this hashtag phenomenon. So we've got I am Charlie, and we've got Stop Tenpenny. But if you really had to get to many of these people and say, look, can we have a real decent conversation about the roots of these things, I doubt whether most of these people would have the ability to even think through the real issues. I mean, we could discuss here, for instance, we could discuss here for days the additives in vaccines as a point of question about whether or not the individual should vaccinate. Because let's have a full disclosure. Let's talk about what is in the vaccines. But and there is much debate out there. You've written a lot about it. Many people have written and done a lot of work on that. But the greater question is the ability for the individual to stand where he is, where he wants to be, and to progress as he wants to into the world, into the future, in the human conversation, in the human debate. I mean, but I see the internet is trivialising so much, and there's so much there I see that I just hate it. I just keep away from it. That hashtag mob, it's like that is what is generating the headlines, and I see that the media are running with that momentum. As a hashtag is developed, if it gets 50,000 hits, bang, that's the headline. But no reality at all.
I've seen that too.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I've watched it happen recently. A story takes off on Twitter, and then the media come in behind it, and they say, well, this is a hot story, so we're going to get lots of eyeballs on this, so we have to treat it seriously, and we have to do a piece on it, or we have to make a segment on the news about it. And we will incorporate into that the fact that, there are so many 100,000 tweets on the subject as part of the story. But we will also treat it as a serious issue because we want to survive as a media outlet. So here we have the best barometer of what people are interested in for whatever reason, and we will go there and make stories, articles, serious coverage out of it, no matter what the hell it is.
Let's have a listen to Sherry just speaking about labels when asked about whether or not she was anti-vaccine. This feeds into really what we're talking about.
Now, Doctor, are you anti-vaccine or are you pro-medical choice?
Actually, I think that whole label of anti-vaccine is just such a misnomer. We're not necessarily, nobody that's involved in this is anti-vaccine. What we really are is pro-informed choice and pro-education. I sometimes feel like remember Gary, the old broadcaster, Paul Harvey, he used to say, here's the page 2, rest of the story. I feel that what I've been able to put out over all of these years is that rest of the story, the hidden side that is very well published in the medical literatures and in government documents, but is not well known to the community, not even well known to conventional medical doctors. So I'm doing an extensive review of the literature. We promote more than somewhere between 12 and 20 reports every week that's pulled out of the conventional medical literature that goes into our vaccine research library. And the vaccine research library has accumulated more than 6,000 articles gleaned specifically from only mainstream medical journals that shows the problems associated with vaccines.
Now, there she is talking about the simplicity of labels. Now, I note there is no reference to those thousands of articles that yourself, John, Sherry, many other researchers have collected over the years, which identify the real issue, even from the mainstream literature. But it gives you the ability to question the narrative. But instead of that, there's just this quick hashtag label like extremist, dangerous. And she very wisely answered that question. It's time to go beyond that if you are interested in thinking, right?
That's right. Yeah. If you're interested in thinking, here's the rest of the story. Make up your own mind. The problem is many people are not able to do that. They're just not able. They don't have what it takes to do that. So they fall back on superficial labels. And they fall back also on major media and quote the experts. And so that's how they form their opinion. And there's, what you're left with. But here, this story about what happened to her goes far beyond that, as I've said, because you can't talk. We're not going to let you talk. So imagine what would have happened if one of these venues had stood up and said, well, guess what? We don't give a shit.
Exactly.
We're going to have Sherry in here, and she can say whatever she wants to because we believe in free speech. Can you imagine what would have happened? You would have had people in the audience screaming at her, interrupting her, calling her names, and she wouldn't have been able to present her case. It would be as if in a courtroom, okay? Because that's sort of, the mythical courtroom is the kind of situation. You've got on one side the government and so forth, and they're presenting their position on vaccines and so forth, and then you have the other side presenting its position on vaccines. So imagine that this, one side gets to talk and then the other side, and they bring witnesses and they question, they cross-examine, whatever. And there's no, there's no time limit on it. So imagine that courtroom situation, but now you've got 1,000 people that are packed in, and they're all screaming, and they're throwing things, and they're marching around, and they are, blowing horns, and fights break out. Now, that's the end of the legal system. It's gone. Well, that's what's happening in the open theater of public debate. In this case, these people who refuse to allow this to happen, the attack on them should be 3 times as great as their attack on her, on Sherry Tenpenny. And I'm not talking about guns and force and violence. I'm talking about uncompromising position. You can blow, this is something that I've learned in 30 years of experience as a reporter. If you're going to go after an entrenched interest, an institution, you better not mince words. You better not ask permission. You better not hope that somebody from the establishment is going to pat you on the head and say, good job. You better not entertain any illusions about that. You have to stand up and present the strongest possible case in the strongest possible language without any sense of compromise. You have to be completely uncompromising. And this is one of the reasons why I don't get invited on certain major media programs, because they know from past experience and looking at what I do when I'm interviewed that, I don't just sit there and take a lot of crap that's thrown at me by these looking down your nose, experts. I tell them that they're crazy and that they don't know what they're talking about and that people have to realize that they're being conned. I go on the attack against them. Well, that's what has to happen as a first step if we're going to get anywhere.
Well, exactly. These people are predators. That's what they are. They are, in every sense, a virus on society, because these people don't manufacture anything, John. They don't. Except for the reality, of course, that we're talking about. But what I'm saying is, that basically they're not people that really develop things, contribute to society, except for taking money off the people to support their system that they've developed. Look at the scientific system that's developed with the medical cartel, as you've recently written regarding psychiatry. All of these mental disorders are concocted. They're made up. They're named and labelled and described by a group of people that wanted to develop this system, right? And so the system itself is like, it depends upon the masses being able to just nod, being able to just accept statements like, well, the science is settled. I invite them on this program, the Australian Medical Association. I said, come on this program. I want you to share for an hour with me your position on vaccines. And then I'm going to give the other person an hour. They refuse. They write back and say, the science is settled. We've got nothing to say. You see, but when the mainstream media invites them on, of course they've got something to say, but they will never, ever come to a point where they open themselves up for critical inquiry or questions. A question about, a simple question like, how do you establish this idea of herd immunity? Rather than just parroting it off. But that's the point, John. They won't expose themselves to the thinkers to answer critical inquiry, critical questions, because they know they haven't got the answers.
Yeah, they understand it. They understand where the power comes from and how it can be dismantled, and they won't put themselves in a position where that can occur. But, on the other side of this, there are people around the world who are using the internet to expose the lies, the crimes, the cover-ups, and so forth. And some of these people are doing it exactly as they should, in a completely uncompromising way. And people who can think are finding these people. And they're seeing what the truth actually is. And things are changing in that respect. So that the idea that Sherri Tenpenny can't get to a venue in a country called Australia and present her views
means nothing. Yeah.
It looks so ridiculous, so absurd, so insane, that in a way the people who are in power lose. They lose more credibility because they won't permit somebody to speak critically of them. It would be as if the president of a country said, look, I've had my, policy experts write down a list of 50 things, 50 types of speech that could be or would be critical of me as the president of this country. And from this point on, we will not allow this speech to occur in any public way. That's what this is. And more people are realizing it. More people are understanding that.
There's really, and you're right, I see that there's largely, broadly speaking, right, because this can be cut up into lots of different layers, but broadly speaking, the thinkers are obtaining, sharing the ideas of freedom, liberty, individuality, and the matrix is shutting it down within their venues, within their sphere of attack, if you like. And I produced a podcast last week, John, without going into it deeply here, but I know you'll understand this. I've categorised basically two groups of people on the earth. There is the hunters that achieve by conquest, and there is the gardeners and the nurturers that achieve by ideas, by care, by development, manufacturing ideas, thinking about these things. So here we have these two sort of polarising groups within the world. One of the hunters that have to go and take and steal, whether it be by war or forced taxation, or because they don't make anything to live. See, so they've got to come and steal off the gardeners. So I see that there's those two main areas of polarisation taking place today, where the gardeners and critical thinkers and those that question the narrative know that they've got to go and not throw stones at the hunters that are coming after them so much, but to develop the garden, to grow the good food, to develop the ideas like you are endeavouring to do, to teach about what true individuality is, so that we can, all of us, achieve it on our own without being dependent upon any other collective for support. And I guess the real test stand is, how do I stand on these issues if everyone else leaves me, right? If I'm on my own.
Yeah, but you won't be, because some people will leave, but others will show up who are the right people. Yeah, what we're looking at here is many people in this world have now gotten onto the idea that it's a source of strength to be able to hurl epithets and insults at other people. That's where they get their strength. That's the only strength they have. They don't have any other strength.
Exactly. Yeah.
They don't have any other source of power.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have any other source of individuality. They don't have any source of creativity. They do, but it's so locked up and buried so deep that they can't even find it because they themselves have surrendered to the collective and to the people that run the collective. And so they have nothing left except that. They can throw stones. That's all they've got. And it certainly speaks to what's happened to our education system and parenting and consumerist culture and so on and so forth, and organized religions. But there you have it. That's where they are. So what we're talking about here is, what is the individual really? When you can separate out the individual from the group, what does that mean? How much power are we talking about? How much potential that is unrealized? How much creativity, imagination, energy, inspiration? How much life are we talking about? And that has to be described sufficiently so that people begin to wake up and say, I don't want to just be another sheep in the herd. I don't want to be just another member of the group. I don't want to be some idiot who goes along with other idiots. This is the battle. This is the battle. Because in the last 10 years in America, certainly, and I know in other countries too, we've seen a tremendous acceleration of the groups, special interests, victim groups, this group, that group, this group, all screaming and demanding and begging for attention, money, favors, whatever it is. And at the slightest possible hint that their feelings might be injured by something that somebody else says, they rise up and they start screaming and complaining and whining and so forth and so on, right? They are destroyers, and they have solidly welded themselves together as a mass mind, as a kind of fungus. Mm-hmm. And in these groups, any talk of individuality is absolutely verboten. That's the nemesis. That's the enemy. I wrote recently, and I've written several times, here we are in America. We supposedly began as a republic, and the definition of that republic was enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the government was supposed to be extremely limited because of experience in Europe where the government ran everything, where the king ran everything, where the monarch, the despot ran everything. And so in the Republic of America, everything would exist in order to liberate the individual to be whatever he or she, is and could be and could become. That was the whole idea of the thing. See? So flash forward to today. You would think that somewhere in America you could find a college or a university that would teach a course called individual power. Right?
Yeah.
You would think so.
No.
But I can tell you that if you went to the most, say, prestigious university in America, Harvard, and somebody endowed a chair in individual power and appointed a professor, and he began to give a lecture series and a course on it, the students would run into that room and stone the place dead.
Yeah.
They would scream, they would throw chairs, they would destroy the whole thing.
Yes.
Now that tells you something about what's happened in all these intervening years. And the propaganda and lies and brainwashing and mind control necessary to have created that enormous change. And that's happening all around the world. That's what we're up against.
There's nowhere exempt. I mean, all the institutions have been overtaken, and I mean this collective global mind is the dominant theme of these institutions of powers. But John, I'm hopeful, like you are, where I recognise the listeners to this broadcast, the people that read your material, the worldwide people who are thinkers. I recognise that there is a thinking people that is still in the world that recognises the matrix, that kingdom of Babylon, for what it is, endeavouring to shut down our creativity, our thinking ability, and the ability to speak to each other. And through this program and your work and many others worldwide, we endeavour to promote that idea of creativity, the idea of the power of the individual, not the power in the collective, but the power of the individual in whatever sphere of thinking he's in, whether it be science, whether it be journalism, whether it be gardening, whether it be religion, spirituality, whatever it is, the power of the individual is utmost, and that's what we must keep striving to help people understand. And I know that's why you and I have the synergy and a oneness in our understanding, even though we come from different positions and different worldviews, because we understand really what the power of individuality is.
No question about it. No question about it. Many people out there have lost the thread of that. They maybe had it one time, and then it was buried. And they found that it was difficult to stand up for what they knew to be true, and so they decided to go along with the crowd. Well, this is the operation called Control Planet Earth. That's what the game is. That's from the point of view of the elite players, is to knock down these dominoes, each one being an individual, and to say, no, you don't really have any independent existence at all, and you have to be part of the group, the mass, the collective. And all of the propaganda, people have to understand this, on the side of the collective it's a good thing. It's a great thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's for everybody. It's to help people. It's to make a better world. It's to unify everybody. It's to unite in with the right ideas, the greatest good for the greatest number. And all of this, you see, is being cynically deployed to draw people in. Because you're not going to draw people in, obviously, by saying, we know that you felt the flash of inspiration of knowing that you were independent and free as an individual, and we're here to crush that. And we want you to join the mass, the collective, so that we can control everybody all at once from a central point. That's not going to, that's not a winning ad. So what is the winning ad? The winning ad is the individual is evil, basically evil,
yes,
greedy,
that's it,
selfish, a hideous creature, cold, unsympathetic, and we will show you examples of this kind of corruption and so on, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the group, when they have the true ideals, this is the salvation of the planet.
Exactly. Yeah.
So naturally, they're going to put the best possible face on this, and people have to be aware that this is a total con and a fix and a covert op and a psychological operation to bring the planet under the control of a few people.
And for those resistors, maybe GMO mosquitoes, insects, and even vaccines, according to Bertrand Russell, could help in actually calming down the individual, right? Fit within the matrix of society. Surrender the mind to the group, to surrender the mind to the matrix, because the science is settled. We know what's best. Trust us. Ladies and gentlemen, look, go to John Rappaport's blog. You'll find it. No More Fake News. His latest article, a whole branch of science turns out to be a fake. Great research, great journalism. John, thanks for joining us. It's been great to be with you.
Thank you so much, Leon. Always great to be with you.
The pro-vaccine community. In fact, it's the Vaccine Skeptics Society that started in Australia that, in my opinion, is one of the most rabid pro-vaccine organizations probably on the planet. They've gone after the vaccine network in Australia that has tried to support parents from having free choice. In Australia, their laws are such that parents can simply refuse to do vaccinations, but if they do that, they have to be subjected to counseling by their doctor, and to me that implies the possibility of browbeating because of the potential for public health concern, that they can refuse to do vaccines if they want to. Probably like the United States, most of the parents there are not aware at the flexibility of their vaccination schedule, and it may very well be that that is what the pro-vaccine community is most concerned about.
I thought you said that once we could grow it, we could vaccinate against it.
We tried using dead virus combined with several adjuvants to boost immune response.
And?
No protective antibodies, a lot of dead monkeys.
Can you get to the part where there's good news?
Now we have to try a live attenuated virus.
Like with polio?
Exactly. The only danger with a live virus is the possibility that it will revert to wild type and kill the host.
When will we know about that?
I'll ask the monkeys.
As of right now, the mortality rate is fluctuating between 25 and 30%, depending upon underlying medical conditions, socioeconomic factors, nutrition, fresh water. With the new mutation, we are predicting an R0 of no less than 4. And without a vaccine, we can anticipate that approximately 1 in 12 people on the planet will contract the disease.
If we even had a viable vaccine right now, we would still have to do human trials, and that would take weeks. And then we would have to get clearance and approval, figure out manufacturing and distribution. That would take months. And then train survivors to give inoculations. More months, more deaths.
Well, Homeland Security wants to know if we could put a vaccination in the water supply, like fluoride, cure everyone all at once.
I'm going home now, Alice.
The Food and Drug Administration is accelerating approval of the MEV-1 vaccine currently in production at 5 secret locations in the U.S. and Europe, saying the first doses could be available for human use within 90 days. The WHO estimates that it could take nearly a year to manufacture and distribute the necessary amount of the vaccine to stop the spread of the virus, which so far has taken over 26 million lives worldwide. But as labs work around the clock to produce the life-saving formula, the question remains, who gets it first?